In Igbo ancestral thought, Ara is mental illness. But Ara itself is short for Igbo Ara, which points to the fact that in the ancestral culture, and as it's seen today, Ara is something that causes a deviation from community or self, something that overcomes or overwhelms the identity and leads to a breakage of bonds between person and self and community, or self and reality. It's the inability to live in truth, actuality, and order due to being overwhelmed by something that is other than you. And in this video, I'm going to go further in depth on the spiritual, genetic, and societal causes of Ara as seen in Odinani Igbo. Because while this definition may be clear and self-explanatory, there is something about the ancestral understanding of self that makes Ara and Igbo psychology different from modern psychology in a very shocking way. Before I begin, I want to ask the question, what is primarily responsible for a person's personality? Is it nature, your genetics, the way you're hardwired, and things of that nature? Or is it nurture, the way you are brought up, the way you're raised, what you're exposed to? Now, of course, most of us can see how both play a role. So I am asking, what is the primary determinant of personality? Nature or nurture? If you believe the primary determinant of personality is nature, type A in the comments. If you believe the primary determinant is nurture, type B. I actually want to see where you guys are at as far as this goes. And if we can get 100 comments, I will make a video giving my own answer. This is Derek Ofadoronwa with The Medicine Shell, and today I am going to discuss Ara, or ancestral psychology. Psychology before what we would now call psychology, and how Igbo psychology views mental illness and health from a spiritual and biological lens, which gives it a very unique ability to identify things that we may not be able to identify today. But to fully understand the relationship between Ara and the cosmos, which then allows you to understand how our ancestors viewed Ara and healing from Ara, my son is going to share a story with you about the time that Ara overcame the mind of Chukwu as a war boiled between the Abara.
At the beginning, there was Chi and Eke. Chi was the husband. Eke was the wife. And together, they created the entire universe. But one day, something really bad happened. It changed the universe forever. Eke died in a really big explosion. Eke's body blew into 1 billion pieces. And that all created the stars, planets, moons, and everything. But there's no order. It was chaotic. There's a big mess. She wanted to rebuild his life. She turned into the universe now. He created the Abara to remove almost all the chaos. He created Allah. He created Anyawu. He created Nemiri, created Amadi Oha. He created Agu, and he created many more. They worked very hard to build the universe. They built earth, sky, water, clouds, sun, and many more. Chukwu loved it because it was a part of him, and they worked hard. But one day, they wanted to know who Chukwu loved the most. They got jealous of each other, and they're talking about who is the best. On one day, they're ready to fight each other to the death. The war was gonna tear Chukwu's mind apart. It was gonna explode almost everything and start the chaos again. That's when Chukwu yelled, Ozule! Chukwu had a plan. He was gonna put the universe back together soon and bring peace again. Because if the Abara fights, it'll tear his mind apart into pieces. He created 4 houses called Eke, Orie, Afa, Nkwo, and Chukwu said, all the Abara should be equal. He put them in their houses, husband and wife. Then he created a market in the middle. If anyone has more than anyone, they can meet in the middle, go to the market, and trade. Everyone was happy and equal. Then they were both trading if they had any more than others. Chukwu told the scariest Abara called 𝐀𝐧𝐣𝐨𝐥𝐚𝐃𝐚𝐯𝐞 to watch over all of the elements and make sure nobody breaks the rules. This is why the ancestors say Uwamu Ahia. From that day on, Chukwu stopped the Ara from taking over the universe to just crumbs that were actually kind of big. Ogula.
The best way to support this channel is by joining our Patreon community, which I have dubbed The Village, at patreon.com/themedicineshell. All members of The Village have full access to my research library. It's got over 300 different books, articles, and things like that about ancestral spirituality and different aspects of ancestral knowledge from all over the African diaspora, but primarily from the Igbo culture. You also get full access to the Igbo Afọ Odinani calendar, which tells you which market day we're in. Eke, Urie, Afọ, Nkwo. What are the spiritual observances and meanings of each of those days? And then the lunar calendar that is tied to it, which tells you what moon we're under and what it means. All of this is available at patreon.com/themedicineshell. But the easiest way to support is by hitting the subscribe button. We are trying to hit 15,000 by this spring. We are currently around 13,000 as the time of this, but I'm very confident we're going to hit 15,000 as more and more of you guys are subscribing at a faster clip. So if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. And the second easiest way to support is sharing this with somebody you know would be interested. For those of you who have the calling to be a healer, we've opened an Igbo traditional medicine course at www.𝐀𝐧𝐼𝐸. This course will teach you how to understand healing from the ancestral perspective. It'll teach you different cures and remedies that are applied by way of herbs and roots, as well as ritual. It'll also put you on course to an apprenticeship with a real Dibia, and eventually an initiation into Dibiahood when the course is over. All of this is available at www.𝐀𝐧𝐼𝐸. And with that being said, let's begin. In order to understand Ara, or insanity in the ancestral worldview, it's best we start by examining what a functional or well-actualized person is in this same worldview. In the Igbo worldview, an individual is not a book, but a page within a book. And in order to understand that page, or for that page to be whole and sensible, you must understand what comes before it, the context around it, and subsequently what comes after. This creates a worldview where personhood is closely linked to the ties you have with your community, your family, and the people around you. An individual is a continuation of their ancestors and everything it took to create them, as well as an organ in a greater familial body, making you one with your loved ones in the past and your loved ones in the present, and forever interconnecting your fates, what you feel, the outcomes of your life, and the consequences of your actions. Or as the Ilu says, when a bad dancer is dancing, it's the eyebrows of his people that itch. And this worldview where individuality or personhood is not separated from the ties you have to family, community, and your people, exists at all levels. An individual is not a single thing in the Igbo worldview, for example, but rather a composite of four things. They're Chi, Eke, Agwu, and Mmụọ. And I'll elaborate on each of these concepts as the video goes, but the general idea is that an individual is made whole based on the relationship of these four parts. And at the same time, each part gives the other parts meaning and ability, as well as life, the way you see with your body's organs. For example, if your liver cannot be a liver, your brain can't function. If your brain is not functioning, your heart has a limited amount of time. But when all of these parts are functioning and doing what they are supposed to do, they allow the other to also do what it's supposed to do. Or as the Ilu says, it is the closeness or combination of the trees that makes the movement of the monkey look beautiful. But still within this worldview, there is a great deal of individuality. But rather, the individuality or the concept of the individual differs from what you might be used to based on how it is framed. In the Igbo worldview, all people have a chi that is unique and specific to them and only them. Your chi is your creator. Some may conceptualize this as a god, but it is the spark, the force, or the consciousness that brought you into existence from inexistence. This means that in the Igbo worldview, or Odinala Igbo, an individual's relationship with their creator is specific and unique to them. Your relationship to your creator will differ from my relationship with my creator, as our creators are not the same and can never be the same. Or as the Ilu says, "Otu na amụ otutu, mana ọ bụ otu ka Chineke." One mother can birth many, but a chi only creates one. Each individual is created unique and created with a unique purpose to actualize a very specific reality that is unique to them. This purpose is a purpose that only your 𝐀𝐧𝐼𝐸 knows. Your 𝐀𝐽 is the element of you that is undying. It is you from the past life, which will continue into another life after you pass. It is also the element of you that is linked to the mind of the creator, known as Etu. It is therefore all-knowing, the seat of your divine ability and what makes you special as an individual. Because your 𝐀𝐽 is your all-knowing you, one can refer to it as your higher self. It is a you that you are always familiar with and is always familiar with you, but oftentimes we have to learn how to listen to it, trust it, and return to its original nature. There are certain behaviors that we can partake in, which our 𝐀𝐽 itself will not partake in with us because it does not desecrate its hands. And for that reason, when we participate in particular things, that which makes us excellent leaves us alone. This gives an individual two natures: 𝐀𝐽, the nature which is linked to purpose, and 𝐀𝐽, a nature that is linked to impulse or the unrefined self. Now this 𝐀𝐽, which holds that which makes you special as a human being, ties back to the ancestral understanding of the self, because that which you have in abundance is what you contribute to the greater whole, rather than something that differentiates or separates you from the whole. A person born with the gift of healing, which is held by their 𝐀𝐽, only has that gift of healing for the purpose of serving their community and their family or the world at large. A person with the gift of speaking is called to speak for those who cannot speak for themselves. A person who is born with an exceptional capacity to create wealth not only contributes that wealth to the collective, but is also expected to help others create wealth for themselves. A person whose 𝐀𝐽 gives them the gift of strength has the gift of strength because they are supposed to protect those who do not have it. In this way, you can think of it similar to giving a credit card to a babysitter. The 𝐀𝐽 nature says that this babysitter will use the credit card to purchase things for the children that they are watching who cannot purchase things for themselves. Whereas the 𝐀𝐽 nature would lead the babysitter to purchasing things for themselves and for their own consumption. And therefore, refinement is when an individual is able to contribute what they have mastered or have in abundance to the greater good. And the opposite is when they either cannot attain that greatness or they do attain that greatness and use it to self-serve or take advantage of others. Now, if an individual who is blessed with a certain gift is using it in the 𝐀𝐽 nature, they can continue to use it and the gift strengthens over time. But if they're using it in the 𝐀𝐽 nature, the gift is taken away from them. The 𝐀𝐽 separates themselves from the individual. And remember this because it is closely linked with the ancestral understanding of mental illness, though maybe not in the way you're thinking. And it's therefore said that an individual who is well actualized performs three forms of 𝐸𝐸, or cultivation. 𝐸𝐸, the cultivation of wealth, the ability to create abundance for yourself and pull the people around you into abundance as well, which is the root of things like the Igbo apprenticeship system, where individuals who succeed in business return to the village and recruit young people who will work under them for a set amount of time. And when that time is over, they open a business for that person where they will use the skills they learned as well as a large down payment to run the same business in a different place, under the expectation that that person will return to the village and do the same. There is 𝐸𝐸, the cultivation of people. the uniting of people by things such as marriage, which unites two families into one, and the birthing of children, as well as helping individuals grow morally, spiritually, and intellectually. For the reasons I've listed, I see two parts of actualization in Odinani Igbo. There is self-actualization, which itself is a route towards collective actualization. And this is encapsulated in the idea that a person who has lived a good life is a person who or a person whose child and grandchildren rush to their feet. Now, buruburu is very difficult to translate, but it is a word that describes what you see when, like, let's say Mandela gets freed from prison and then a whole bunch of people rush towards him. Or maybe like a celebrity appears and everybody loves this person, so they all rush towards that person, and so forth. Which is why in Igbo say, buruburu bu 𝐀𝐧𝐣𝐨𝐥𝐚𝐃𝐚𝐯𝐞. The rush of a people is what a king is measured by. In Omenala Igbo, or Igbo culture, people who a community see as well actualized by exemplifying these particular ideals are awarded titles. These titles allow individuals, men and women, to perform ikpe, or to serve as a judge in settling disputes for people in the community. These titles make individuals leaders in the community. It affords an individual a seat in the Ọha, or the traditional Congress, where decisions for the community as a whole are made, and assures the individual enters the next life as an ancestor, or allows an individual to achieve ancestorhood while they're still alive. Because your Agwu is a gift that your Chi gives the world in service of the world, the actualization of that gift, or you reaching your full potential, is known as Awele. The way I describe Awele is through the concept of the seed. Now, if you look at a seed, it is an entire forest, or this is how the ancestors would see it. Now, if you plant this seed in the ground, it's going to grow a tree. All things go correctly. That tree will lead to the growing of more trees. Maybe more seeds will fall from it. Maybe birds who are carrying seeds in their stomach will defecate when they perch on it, and so forth. And over time, a forest will emerge from the existence of this one seed. And when you see that forest, when you see the full form of the seed in manifestation, or when its chi shows itself in full, you are witnessing a seed that has achieved Awele. If you want a video on Awele, comment below. So if this is a trajectory for a socially normal person or a well-actualized person, what is the opposite in context to Ara? Or what is Ara, the ancestral worldview? In Omenala Igbo, Ara, or mental illness, is any lasting form of inconsistent, irregular, excessive, acultural, or transgressive behavior. This includes excessive forms of disrespect, and very well emphasized in the understanding of mental illness is the nature of drawing shame in others, especially if the individual is unaware or unable to contextualize the tendency due to being observably out of touch with reality. Put simply, it is a person plagued with antisocial, irregular behaviors that also doesn't have the capacity to contextualize their behavior because they are not in touch with reality. Because the Agwu nature is associated with order, the Agwa nature is associated with disorder, and there is a connection between Ara and chaos of mind, body, community, and spirit. Ara is a mental configuration which leads to Nleda, which is a denigration of identity or personhood that is also a public spectacle. At the highest cosmic level, the spirit of Ara is symbolized through 𝐀𝐧𝐼𝐨𝐴. 𝐀𝐧𝐼𝐴 is 𝐀𝐧𝐃𝐚𝐃𝐚, or the divine mother. And because her roles in ancestral understanding are vast, ranging from the mother of all things to the universe itself, 𝐀𝐀𝐧𝐼𝐴, or 𝐀𝐧𝐃𝐚, is understood as a body of many forms. To encapsulate her relationship with chaos, the name Nana is often used to describe the same spirit. Nana, a reference to the chaotic nature of 𝐀𝐀𝐧𝐼𝐴, is the spirit of disorder in the universe, as the universe is a cosmic dance between disorder and order. Agwu. The spirit of chaos is also embodied in one of 𝐀𝐀𝐧𝐼𝐴's forms, which is the ahia, or the market. In the Igbo worldview, the market is sacred, as it is a microcosm of the universe itself and how the universe works. Like the universe, or uwa, it is feminine. The footpaths that lead from each community to the market are a microcosm of the strings by which life flows through the universe, known as ete, and in ordering the universe. And all of this is encapsulated by the ilu, uabuahia, madozucha, Allah. The world is a market. When we're done shopping, we leave. It's important to note that in the Igbo worldview, Ndiara, or mad people, tend to conjugate or be drawn towards places that have the same energy or configuration as Nono, the universal spirit of chaos. It's from my own observation that here in the US, the mentally ill tend to gather in downtowns where it's busy, under bridges where there's a lot of places where there's a lot of foot traffic, public venues, beaches. And at home, the same observation is made. When Ara strikes or overcomes a person, they are often drawn to one of many places. It can be the Ohia, the forest, the Ahia, the marketplace, or the Oha, the community gathering place, or the public square by which the community meets and does government. I wanted to note that a lot of my research for this particular video comes from the book Healing Insanity by Dr. Patrick Iroegbu. And in this particular book, he does clearly illustrate how the frequency of the mind affected by Ara is the same as the frequency of the market, and therefore there is a draw between the two. There's even a belief among some Dibias that once Onyara, or a mad person, enters a market, there's no healing that person. They're gone forever. But one thing he pointed out that was particularly interesting is not everything we would consider Ara in the West is also considered Ara, or mental disturbance, in the Igbo context. For example, something like depression would not be considered Ara, insomnia, and so forth, as many of those things are normal mental and physical responses to appropriate stimuli, or lack thereof. So for example, if a person is emotionally abused through their childhood and they develop depression as an adult, that is a normal response to an abnormal trauma and is therefore not Ara, because it's not disorder. In the Owu masquerade, there is a particular masquerade known as Nono, and Nono is a very chaotic, very frantic, very destructive masquerade that comes out and is difficult to control. It kind of just runs awry. Now, the only thing that you can use to get Nono to behave correctly or to act in an orderly fashion is by showing Nono a feather, as feathers represent order, purity, and respect in Odinala Ndibo. And for this reason, when an individual takes a title, depending on the title, one or several eagle feathers will be worn in the hat to symbolize the attainment of the higher self, as well as the commitment to purity, order, and respect. Ara has 6 primary causes, the first being genetics. The genetic nature of mental illness is well understood by our ancestors, and oftentimes is connected to a lot of the stigma that is attached to individuals that exhibit mental illness. So for example, in Igbo culture, it's very common, in fact it's the norm, when you're going to get married, to send an individual to your significant other's village to kind of spy on the family and to see if they have certain things that would be undesirable. One of the things that would be undesirable is a regular recurrence of mental illness, or a reputation for antisocial behavior that may be attached to the family. It is also important to note that in traditional Igbo marriage, you don't really marry an individual as much as you marry their family. In fact, the entire marriage ceremony is done without the presence of the bride or the groom. Now, by the time you have the more popular 𝐀𝐧𝐣𝐨𝐥𝐚𝐃𝐚𝐯𝐞 ceremony, where the wife brings out the wine and finds her husband in the crowd and kneels and gives him some, and they get up together and celebrate, and the fathers say blessings for the couple. By the time that happens, the marriage has already done. So the traditional wedding is actually the bride price ceremony, which is done amongst elders. By the time 𝐀𝐴 starts, the couple is already married. But because the family element, be it the nature of the family or what is visible about the genetic makeup of the family, can never be separated from an individual, there's a strong understanding that Ara is linked to genetics. And it's oftentimes explained with the ilu, "Nwa mara nna ya, amarago ihe chere ya n'ụwa." A child who knows their father knows what awaits them in the world. The next cause of ara is possession. In Odinani Igbo, a person is a combination of mado, the physical corporal being, and mo, the auraic spirit being. And we are aware that our physical being can be infected by viruses and bacteria. In the same sense, your mo can also be infected by maladaptive or parasitic entities known as 𝐀𝐧𝐼𝐨𝐥𝐚𝐃𝐚𝐯𝐞. Once possessed, 𝐀𝐀𝐧𝐼𝐴 can drive an individual's behaviors, thought patterns, an identity towards what it wishes to reflect in the world, very often turning an individual to onye banama, a wanderer or a person who conducts themselves in public without shame. Now, I can do a video on 𝐀𝐀𝐧𝐼𝐴, so if you want to get a video on possession, comment below. But one of the ways an individual makes themselves susceptible to possession is by harboring feelings, thoughts, and behaviors that are adjacent to the spirit, which then attracts the spirit towards you until ultimately the spirit takes control, which then turns the feeling into ara because the feeling or the 𝐀𝐀𝐧𝐼𝐴 has superseded your identity. There's a whole class of diagnoses that come from this specific type of possession. For example, ara onoma, which is an excessive paranoid anger, but it usually stems from some type of feeling of inadequacy and is very common with childless women, individuals who are poor but have rich family members or peers, or adults who feel like they don't measure up to the standard that they are supposed to measure up to. Now, this particular ara is identifiable because, one, the paranoid anger has a level of theater to it. The individual is unable to control themselves, and on a physical level, the person will have an abnormal gaze. I don't know if you guys remember when Little Boosie was talking about how once you become famous or rich, you can't live in your hometown anymore because the people in your hometown get hypnotized with hatred. And then he goes on and describes exactly what being hypnotized with hatred is. Like, it was really interesting reading about this ara because it's dead on what he described. Just wanted to put that in there. The next form of ara is Iroegbu. Iroegbu, also known as ara nsi, has two forms. The first is the ara that somebody uses nsi, or spiritual medicine, to place on you. And the second is the form that you acquire by performing certain types of nsi or certain types of ogwu. This second form, the side effect version of ara, where an individual performs a form of nsi and then that nsi causes them as a side effect to have ara, is always a side effect of an individual trying to use nsi or ogwu to do one of two things. One, cause malicious harm to another person, or two, speed up their destiny or their chi. And this side effect version of ara is defined in the ilu, onye ji mmadụ n'ala, ji onwe ya. The person holding another person to the ground is also stuck there. The next cause is similar to nsi, and this is aru, abominations against the land. The committing of aru is a primary cause of ara according to Odinani Igbo. Aru itself is a violation of Iwala, the laws of the land. These are sacred oaths that your ancestors made with the land that they live on, which allow them to live symbiotically with the land, in peace and accordance. When these laws are broken, one of the common ways the land exacts retribution is by striking the individual who broke the law with ara, and then the spreading of ara until an act of ndoziala, the cleansing, repairing, and healing of the land, is done. Our ancestors conceptualize human awareness, or amamihe, as a combination of two things, aka and uche. Aka specifically being earth consciousness, or senses, better understood as intellect, but understood by our ancestors as coming from the earth and flowing through people, meaning that when this connection is severed, the individual becomes senseless. Aru varies by land, and it is in fact the land that will tell you what is Aru once you are living on it and you establish communication with it by way of building an Arushi, a channeling device for communicating with an Abara, or a force of nature, such as land, the sky, earth, and so forth. But almost universally through Igbo land, some things considered Aru include incest, and it should be noted that this also includes sleeping with the spouses of your siblings, as well as direct blood relatives. Murder of any kind, including towards yourself, and the desecrating of things a community holds sacred or things that belong to the sacred, such as sacred animals, sacred trees, and sacred forests or groves. The next cause is an imbalance in your 𝐀𝐧𝐼𝐸𝐴. The 𝐀𝐧𝐼𝐸𝐴 is the full, complete, and total you, often depicted as a four-faced figure which faces all four corners of existence, eke, urie, afo, and nkwo. But in totality, the 𝐀𝐧𝐼𝐸𝐴 is you as a galaxy, with your chi at the center that all things orbit around, but everything in your orbit coming together to make you, the whole you, both physical, mado, and spiritual, mo. Maintaining balance and accord is key to preventing ara from affecting your 𝐀𝐧𝐼𝐸𝐴, as imbalances within the 𝐀𝐧𝐼𝐸𝐴 can reflect in changes in personality, behavior, self-control, and self-regulation. Certain parts of your 𝐀𝐧𝐼𝐸𝐴, by way of neglect, can become weakened and therefore keep you from accessing the power that they are in orbit to grant you. Similar to the weakening of physical limbs that you do not acknowledge by way of exercise and movement. Now, if you want a full video on the 𝐀𝐧𝐼𝐸𝐴, comment below. But one common and very peculiar thing that affects the 𝐀𝐧𝐼𝐸𝐴 is the presence of forces that ordinarily should not be there. One of which is an 𝐻𝐵𝐴nJ spirit. An 𝐻𝐵𝐴nJ spirit is a spirit that follows you from the marine world in the process of reincarnation, as it is said, because in the process of Iluwa, or reincarnation, an individual will cross two rivers, which manifest in the physical form as the whiteness of a corpse and the whiteness of a newborn baby. In the process of crossing these two rivers, various spirits may attach themselves to your 𝐀𝐧𝐼𝐸𝐴 and use you as a vehicle to enter the world, one of which is the 𝐻𝐵𝐴nJ spirit, a childlike spirit which comes into the world to purely enjoy the world, and for one reason or another may prematurely decide to end their trip, which can lead to the death of the individual it's attached to. There's also the possession by di na nwunye mmiri, or the existence of a spirit bride or spirit husband in your 𝐀𝐧𝐼𝐸𝐴, which can also cause a form of ara, as well as issues with holding a relationship. Now, if you're interested in a video on spirit spouses, comment below. The committing of aro can lead to ara nsoala, a mental illness that is caused by the committing of an abomination such as incest or murder. Symptoms feature murmuring and behaviors that resemble schizoaffective or even schizophrenia, as well as a difficulty looking upwards, difficulty sleeping, and a paranoid fear that can lead to paranoid anger and violence. The next possible cause of ara is behavior. An individual can engage in behaviors that trigger ara, as is seen in ara ụmụakwụkwọ, a particular form of ara that plagues students in the modern day, and is often known as student insanity, which comes from abusing stimulants, not sleeping, and excessive mental exertion all combined together. Symptoms are a burning feeling of the head, drowsiness, and an inability to retain information. It's been observed with ara ụmụakwụkwọ that victims are typically from poorer families or part of medical programs, which leads to a suspicion that social pressure may also play a role in this particular ara. In the same category is ara ngoroma, ara brought on by substance abuse. After behaviors comes the final cause of ara that I'm discussing today, which is agụ. One of the best ways to understand agụ and how agụ affects ara is to know it by its many names, one of which is Moara, the spirit of madness. Agụ is the abara most associated with mental illness, and without irony, the source of mental stability and the ability to heal, which is where it gets one of its many names, Chi Agụ, the source or god of medicine and healing. And this is because Agụ deals in all forms of duality, good and bad, light and dark, sickness and healing, madness and sanity, which is embodied by one of Agụ's many symbols, Ma ihu abụọ, the two-faced sword. Earlier I said that an individual is a composite of four elements: their chi, which is their creator, the god source, or the spark that brought you into existence, eke, which is that God source coming into existence. You as a universe, also referred to as your 𝐀𝐧𝐣𝐨𝐥𝐚𝐃𝐚𝐯𝐞. And then the third that I listed was your 𝐴𝐴𝐴𝐴𝐴. Your 𝐴𝐴𝐴𝐴 is the part of you that returns to the world after you pass and came into the world as you from a previous life. And under this role, it is known as your 𝐀𝐧𝐣𝐨𝐴𝐴, your worldly chi. 𝐴𝐴𝐴 is the 𝐀𝐧𝐽𝐽 because 𝐴𝐴𝐴 is the part of you that knows why your chi brought you into existence. And it is this dedication to your divine purpose that makes it your life guide if you're able to listen to, access, and cooperate with it. 𝐴𝐴𝐴 knows this purpose in part because it came into the world specifically to actualize this purpose, but also because 𝐴𝐴𝐴 is linked to your chi, because 𝐴𝐴𝐴 has the same mind as your chi, known as 𝐸tu, the mind of the creator. 𝐴𝐴𝐴 can influence but does not fully control you as an individual, as it is only a part of you. It is the part of you that you come to realize that is walking with you, and you are walking with it. When 𝐴𝐴𝐴 comes into the world to heal, meaning that you are by divine mandate a healer, and the individual either refuses to take up the calling, is unaware of the calling, and therefore doesn't even consider it, or takes up the calling but conducts it in a way that is below 𝐴𝐴𝐴's moral and ethical standard, an individual is stricken with 𝐴𝐴𝐴. 𝐴𝐴𝐴 is an affliction that causes an individual to have a shattered sense of identity. The individual can break into paranoia, delusion, bouts of wandering, episodes of mania, and a persistent inability to do what used to come easy to them. Those most often afflicted by 𝐴𝐴𝐴 are individuals who have the calling to be a debia. A debia is a traditional healer in the ancestral worldview, but the word itself can more accurately be translated to a genius, meaning that an individual can be a debia in many different fields, but that when they approach that field or that area of existence, they have a divinely inspired ability to excel within it. And this is because a debia is a master of abia, divine light or divine wisdom. Abia are rays of divine light sent by Chukwu Okike Abiyama, or God in the Igbo worldview. And amongst all human beings, there are certain people who can receive these rays of divine light and share them with the rest of humanity. These individuals are the debias. And because the debia is a custodian of divine ability who is tasked with sharing this divine ability with the rest of the world, be it their family and community or the world at large, the particular calling of the debia or the genius is so critical to their 𝐴𝐴𝐴 that if that individual neglects it, maluses it, or doesn't step into the role, 𝐴𝐴𝐴 will punish the individual by use of 𝐴𝐴𝐴 or 𝐴𝐴𝐴's insanity. Now, it's very important to note, especially for what I'm going to say next, that by nature, an individual who is born to be a debia is going to be able to see, hear, and feel things that the average person cannot. And if they were to sit down and tell you these things and you don't particularly understand their calling, you may think that they are crazy, because a debia is gifted with extra sensory ability. They may have a configuration of the world or a way of thinking that the average person is going to perceive as mental illness. So the difference between just being a debia and 𝐴𝐴𝐴 goes back to what our ancestors say about 𝐴𝐴 and a healthy person. A healthy person is an individual, like all individuals, who has particular gifts, but the ultimate purpose of these gifts is to use these gifts in service of others, or to pour what they have abundantly into the world. 𝐴𝐴𝐴 differs because the unique configuration of a debia's mind turns against the debia. So an individual who is a medium or gifted as a medium is able to contribute this mediumship by being a vessel by which individuals communicate with those beyond the mortal realm. But this mediumship can also turn against the person when they misuse the gift or neglect it and turn into delusions and hauntings. And this is why the number one solution for 𝐴𝐴𝐴 is not so much getting rid of it, but learning how to accept it and rechannel it towards the service of others. And this brings me to the final part of this video: psychiatric cures. By looking at the cures commonly used in Igbo psychiatry, we can then get the answer to the question, what does an African-centered psychology look like? Now, for the most part, cures and treatments in Igbo psychology have more parallel than they have difference with Western psychology. But there are 3 key points where I see differences. Difference number 1, a disorder in the Igbo worldview is something that overcomes your ordinary personality. If a person is violent and has been violent since they were a child and they grow into a violent adult, this is not necessarily considered a psychiatric disorder. And personally, I think a lot of this goes back to the fact that from my own observation in Western society, particularly in American society, your relationships are hedged primarily on how you feel about the other person. Whereas in Igbo society and most African societies, acceptance is a given, particularly in the family context. So a lot of Western psychology deals with behavior modification or behavior management so that your capacity to be accepted isn't hindered. Whereas in Igbo psychology, there's a little bit more of an emphasis on you making peace with your disorder and learning to live symbiotically with it rather than having it control, dominate, and harm you. And because acceptance is a given, especially again in the family context, a lot of behavioral disorders are still seen as behavioral problems. But if you've always been that way, people just kind of accept that that's your identity. And more importantly, that there is a time and a place where your particularly difficult identity is going to be of value. Now, if you have a personality that is very difficult to deal with, there's also an added belief in the Igbo worldview that if this is the identity that's natural to you, if you have been this way perhaps since you were a child and it's just who you are, that there are times in your life where this particular configuration is going to be of great value to you and the community. Or as the Ilu says, Igbo nyaga n'oge udo, 𝐀𝐧𝐣𝐨𝐥𝐚𝐃𝐚𝐯𝐞. If you kill a warrior in a time of peace, you will remember him in the time of war. Another difference is the personification of ara or mental illness. In the Igbo worldview, because ara is an interruption of your identity, mental illness and your identity are seen as 2 separate things. And they are in a way seen as 2 personalities clashing. And therefore, in several cases, you'll see cures that lend themselves more towards the peaceful bypassing of the 2 forces, or a symbiotic living, and even a peaceful and amicable severance or separation between the source of the mental illness, which is then personified, and you as an individual. The third difference I noticed between Western and Igbo psychology is that in Igbo psychology, there seems to be a higher emphasis on the reintegration portion of healing and therapy, as ara is labeled as a problem once it causes an inability to coexist with the collective. The Igbo philosophy on healing is a process of reconnection, reconnecting a person to self and reconnecting self to community. Because ara is seen as something external that is affecting an individual, or as in Igbo say, ara na-agba mmadụ, literally translating to ara is playing a person, but commonly used to simply say a person is being affected by mental illness. The first step in healing is to subdue the extreme manifestations of ara in a person's body and behavior. On an herbal level, a medicine using osisi ajo, rawolfia, or mgbọrọgwụ akata, 3 herbs that are commonly used to restore order to a disordered mind and help patients end things like panic attacks, psychotic episodes, violent outbursts, or resistance to therapy. Now, if you're interested in a video on sacred trees, which are also medicinal trees, or a video on roots and herbs, comment below and I'll put it up for vote. We've also opened a traditional healing class on www.𝐀𝐧𝐣𝐴. So if you want to learn about herbology or mgbọrọgwụ, go to www.𝐀𝐧𝐣𝐴 and see if you can get signed up. Many of these herbs, which are not limited to the 3 that I listed, induce vomiting. And when the vomiting is induced, one can release what debia or psychiatric debias call 𝐀𝐧𝐼𝐨𝐿𝐴, the liquid substance of a spirit. This is particularly true when 𝐀𝐧𝐼𝐴𝐵𝐴, 𝐴𝐵𝐴, and ugarishi are the plants that are used. The debia would then examine the vomit in many cases to see the exact condition of what's going on internally. And if the vomiting becomes excessive, coconut water or 𝐀𝐧𝐼𝐴 is applied to stop the vomiting. The next step is the creation of an 𝐀𝐧𝐼𝐴. The 𝐀𝐧𝐼𝐴 is a boiling medicinal pot with many herbs and substances placed inside of it, which produces a vapor that is then inhaled by the patient. And like the taking of herbs that induce vomiting, this particular step is also linked to the idea of separating the individual from the moi, or the spirit of the ara. After this phase, the next thing that is done is the application of what is known as the silencing root, or 𝐴𝐵𝐴 akata. 𝐴𝐵𝐴 akata is a hyper powerful herb, or 𝐀𝐧𝐼𝐴𝐴, that is also poisonous. So I do not recommend anybody take this on their own. Please be in the care of an experienced professional. But when administered in the proper doses, has a highly effective psychoactive property that is said to heal many forms of ara. But even upon healing, in Igbo have an ilu that says, you can keep a person from madness, but you cannot keep the mad from murmuring, meaning that those healed from ara are still going to exhibit abnormal behavior. But we have now worked to a point where the abnormal behavior is no longer destructive to the person or the community around them. And once the phase of investigation and medication is complete, we now enter a set of steps that resemble therapy and reintegration into the community. It is common for a dibia ara to have several spaces in their own ubi, or home, where their patients will sleep for several days, if not several moons. While the patients are staying with the dibia ara, they'll work as servants, assisting the dibia in their day-to-day activities and undergoing behavioral training. Part of this behavioral training is the phase of healing known as 𝐴𝐵𝐴, the lock and key phase, where the ara is given a physical form in the form of an effigy or a mask. This effigy is symbolically tied or locked with several keys. Once this is done, a sacrifice is performed. And this sacrifice is to consecrate a new relationship between the patient and the ara that they are affected by. The dibia will give the ara and the patient new terms by which they will live that allows each of them to exist symbiotically and bypass each other without conflict or clash. For example, one of these renegotiations for somebody whose mental illness causes them to wander could be that they can no longer wander on regular days, but on certain market days, or maybe on a single day in the moon, they will return to the dibia's ubi. They will pick up the symbol or opunsi of the ara, and they will wander with the symbol, since the spirit of the ara wants to wander. This therefore gives the spirit the opportunity to wander with its former host in an organized, controlled, and mutually agreed time period, rather than at random or constantly. Another form of therapy they may undergo while living with the dibia is the day-long walk. The day-long walk is a walk through town that begins very early in the day and ends sometime in the evening. The purpose of the day-long walk is multifaceted, but its primary purposes are the utilization of exhaustion and exertion as a means of stabilizing a person, behavioral training for when the individual is in town, as the walkers are monitored by the dibia or an apprentice, as well as preparing the patient for a ritual bath that will aid them in sleeping, mood stability, as well as the increasing of an appetite, something that dibias at home acknowledge that schizophrenics struggle with. Life in the dibia's ubi can also apply music therapy, or 𝐀𝐧𝐼𝐴𝐴. Oftentimes, dance is used as a method of diagnosing an individual, as the way a person dances gives insight on the nature of the spirit by which they operate with. Certain forms of ara are identified by their dancing, or how they possess a person to dance. If you guys want a video on sacred music, comment below. There's a lot that I need to share on that one, but I can give a little more detail on how the whole thing works. At the end of a healing process, if there is an end to a healing process, the land itself is purified. through the process of ndoziala. Ndoziala is the science of purifying and cleaning a land of abominations and rectifying the relationship of a people and the land that they live on, or a person and their own home. This is done because while undergoing Ara, an individual is liable to do many things that would be ordinarily considered abhorrent or violations of the land's sacred laws. But by cleansing the land, the individual is given a chance to start again, is forgiven by the highest authority in a community, which is Allah, the earth herself. And the relationship between that person and the land which sustains their community is restored, freeing them of guilt, as the guilt caused by the Ara is now attached to the spirit which brought the Ara upon the person. And that's it. As always, this is Derek Ofadarangwa with The Medicine Show. Thank you.